Okay, let's have this conversation with Associate Professor Sam Amadi on the implications of this move and how ECOWAS can successfully navigate this slippery road. Very slippery indeed, and when you look at the three Sahelian countries, it's been between them 3 years that the imbroglio with the Commission has been on, and it's yet not been resolved, even though the Commission Secretariat in his statement, just said that they've been working together to return the countries to constitutional order.
Well, I think this is like a build-up, and now this is the crescendo, if you like, with the declared pulling out. And again, it's also a case of failure of diplomacy. I mean, like I said, 3 years on escalated last year with the Niger version of that. And then, of course, the altercation between the Nigerian-led ECOWAS and the junta. Now, three things are playing out here. One is, of course, initially in December, they met to have their own alliance, plan to have a monetary union, plan to have investment bank, and of course, have investment fund for themselves. These are countries that are poor economies. I mean, so essentially, the impact might not be much in terms of...
Would you say poor economies? I mean, with the, world's largest deposit of uranium between the three countries?
This potential wealth, but just like Nigeria is a nation with elite resources, but if you look at the GDP per capita, GDP, if you look at even gross national income, they are still very poor. I mean, the poorest country in the world, arguably, is Niger, if you look at the poverty index global. But the point is this, they are strategic. This is the Sahel. With the war against Islamic terrorism, the war against militancy around the Sahel, these countries are critical. Now, if you look at West Africa, 48 or 49 years work of integration seems to be unraveling because of the first proxy wars. I mean, software, if you like. Russia is interested in what's going on there. They are fighting with France and the Western powers and relying on Russia. Again, this is regime protection. This junta seem not to want to cave in to ultimatum from the ECOWAS. They're not putting out a clear roadmap to return to democracy. So this is self-serving. They want to shrug off, if you like, the ECOWAS, interference and pressure. On a bigger scale, in geopolitics, they pulling away from the West and aligning with Russia. It might be that Russia will have a stronghold, a center in West Africa where it can challenge the West, and this is not good for Nigeria particularly. I mean, this means 2 of our 3 neighbors are now in a different regional bloc if this goes ahead. And so we lose the diplomatic leverage. I mean, so if we have a crisis and we need to work with Niger or Mali to try to do some strategic work on intelligence, we're not going to have diplomatic resource. It's like dealing with East African regional bloc or deal with South African regional bloc. So it's really not good for us in terms of our geopolitical advantage, and the fact that we need to have control of this sub-region to optimize our African leader role.
Are we losing grip of it? Nigeria's president is, the chairman of the heads of government of ECOWAS.
It's a vote of, if you like, failure, because look, the part of the work of the Nigerian president as the chairman of ECOWAS and as the leading country that actually funds ECOWAS is to have engaged in a diplomatic shuttle to convince, pressure, carrot and stick, these coupists to at least return to democracy or even de-escalate. So if they are escalating and threatening and pulling out, not threatening, pulling out in this manner, it means that they totally disregard the leadership of the Nigerian president, who is the ECOWAS president. And so it puts Nigeria in a difficult position where we cannot, control our next neighbor. Critical, vital. Look at the northern Nigeria and Niger, almost indistinguishable. So this is really bad for foreign policy, bad for the Nigerian image. And again, it tells us a story around weakened influence, because no matter what it is, either we'll force them to go back to democracy or find a way to make them de-escalate and promise we will. So basically, this shows weakness, failure of diplomacy, which turns to failure of leadership of Nigeria primarily and ECOWAS.
Okay, another question is that, are there consequences, for such withdrawals by these 3 Sahelian countries? ECOWAS is saying, ECOWAS has quoted Article 91,
yep.
Sine qua non to withdrawal. What other protocols will these three countries be breaking?
First, the treaty obligations that you have to give notice for 1 year. And the idea is it presupposes a peaceful break. Those countries can look, the economic, the objective of this union doesn't serve us well. And so they give notice to their co-parties so that they can wind up commitments. And so that envisages a peaceful pullout. But the problem is that this is a pullout that's more like calling the bluff. I mean, so yes, they technically would have violated the treaty. But the question is, the treaty rests on political sovereigns agreeing to commit. So yeah, why are you going to use war? Are you going to force them in? Those obligations, they don't complete. So technically, they are in breach of the treaty. But essentially, this is a violent pull away, which is not anticipated by the treaty obligation. So if they go ahead and say, we don't have no business with you, what are we going to do? Fight them or whatever. So it's clearly not the kind of thing anticipated. And this is a violent, aggressive, pulling away, not just a peaceful one where you give notice. Again, can it be a bluff to probably make ECOWAS descend from their moral high ground and probably agree that the coup is continue? Could it be a bluff? Could it be just to say, you know what, want to force them to agree to us? Or is it real? If it's real, I think it's bad. It's bad for West Africa. It shows lack of strategic leadership in the West African bloc. And again, maybe some may argue that West Africa has become, a proxy to big geopolitical fight. So the Russians, the Chinese, and Americans, and the Western powers. And so instead of us being authentic and organizing ourselves as a unit to strengthen regional and economic cooperation and security, we are now becoming a theater for big powers to fight. So on both levels, this is a bad news. I mean, Nigeria will not lose much economically in terms of trade, okay? Some households in the north of Nigeria will lose, maybe the custom duties may be imposed, maybe we don't have access to the porous. So they will lose just not much, apart from household income. But this is big for national security. Okay,
let's look at ECOWAS itself. I'm sure one of the founding fathers who is still very much alive, Nigeria's former head of state, General Gowon, will be watching this development. And the question is, how much socio-political and economic milestone would you say ECOWAS has achieved in its almost half a century in existence? The ECOWAS currency unit is still not there. The Lagos Benin Abidjan road corridor is still not there 50 years after. The West African gas pipeline it's not it's still not there, and the rest was supposed to be piped as far as Algeria and the rest. So what are those things that you can really point to say, yes, ECOWAS has made great progress when you have this kind of a division?
I think ECOWAS supporters, optimists, will say that first, we've not had any real flare-out, military conflict in ECOWAS, in the region. We've been able to, ECOWAS has done well in terms of military peacekeeping, with Liberia, Sierra Leone. They've also done well we've not had any quarrel among ourselves. So again, that could be a plus. On the regional integration side, we've not done much because the economy is not working. We've not created an ECOWAS market, which is very important. Because the idea is, if Nigeria leads and we're able to trade among us, ECOWAS trade, inter-trade, in ECOWAS, regional trade is very low. So we need to expand, and maybe the lack of economic growth, robust growth within this manufacturing sector growing, creating an industrial corridor. Nigeria, Lagos, Benin, Abidjan, a manufacturing corridor where good infrastructure road. We started late trying to build these regional roads. So if you had good infrastructure, good industrial corridor, then you stimulate growth, co-generation of wealth and shared prosperity that will stimulate and make, just like EU. I mean, so you create that. Would have not done that politically, culturally. Would have you had good integration? The francophone, anglophone diplomatic rivalries, continue. So I think you can say that ECOWAS has failed, like in the language of the coupists who are now saying, look, we got no value. But one can also say that they have tried in security issues, in collaboration, and maintaining peace in the region. But again, we need ECOWAS to be strengthened, not weakened. And unfortunately, maybe in retrospect, the way that the ECOWAS leadership managed, there was some kind of stimulated and artificial outrage over this coup. Look, the coup is a function of socioeconomic circumstances. Maybe they could have engaged more strategically. Maybe they would have headed off this crisis in a way. But I think there was some kind of, maybe the President of Nigeria coming to election, needing to boast his democratic credential, ratcheted up the rhetoric too high. And I think looking back, it could have been better managed, and maybe we wouldn't have got to this point where these three critical neighbors, critical because they are critical to security. The cultural, the insecurity architecture rests on some degree of cooperation with Niger and Mali, and we are losing that when they now form rival union, angry against Nigeria, and so you have less opportunity for diplomatic leverage in order to secure yourself. So I think that in retrospect, ECOWAS leadership didn't quite do well. Maybe they have no option. This is about democracy, the West breathing on you, America giving impetus, challenging you, stand up for democracy. We've got Niger democracy now. We didn't get ECOWAS.
Would it be too late to woo these three Sahelian countries back to ECOWAS?
Not too late. I mean, you need to have the credibility first.
What kind of incentives would you be giving them now? Or what would you be telling?
First, they need to know that it's a lose-lose for them. I mean, they're not going to win the long term. The question is, do you have the entry point to begin to make that communication? Let the junta know that, look, yes, they want power, but look, you can't sustain it with a very, aggressive and enemy
Even
ECOWAS.
with the two other world powers that you've mentioned behind them, China, Russia, and the rest, waiting for the spoil of war from these countries.
Russia is sending the military, the support, but then you also need to have significant leverage over your neighbors. Niger would need Nigeria a lot. Nigeria needs Niger. So yes, you can't play a Russian game with the West, but at the same time, you can be part of West Africa and do that. So I think the communication needs to be strengthened. Incentive has to go in. You need to also show respect and admit maybe that we've lost the battle over democracy in these countries. When I need to get them back to the fold and nudge them. Nudge is not forcing them, but nudge them towards democratic recovery.
Thank you so very much, Associate Professor of Law and a rights analyst, Dr. Sam Amadi, for shedding more light on that.